so lonesome I could cry.
The medical examiner had seen death in every form imaginable. Gunshots, car wrecks, overdoses, disease, 30 years of cutting open bodies and documenting what killed them. But when he opened up Elvis Presley on August 16th, 1977, he stopped cold. What he was looking at didn't make sense. This wasn't the body of a 42-year-old man. This was the body of someone who had been dying slowly, painfully, and obviously for at least a decade, and somehow, impossibly, nobody had done a thing about it. That's not a theory. That's not dramatic storytelling. That's what the evidence showed. And what makes it terrifying isn't just what they found inside the king of rock and roll. It's the fact that everyone around him watched it happen in real time and convinced themselves it was fine. Rewind to June 1977, just 2 months before his death. Elvis walks on stage in Indianapolis, and the footage still exists. You can watch it right now if you want to see what denial looks like in real time. The jumpsuit barely contains him. His face is swollen, almost unrecognizable from the man who changed music forever. He's sweating through the first song like he's running a marathon. His movements are slow, labored, almost painful to watch, but his voice, God, his voice still had it. And maybe that's what fooled everyone. Maybe that's what they used to convince themselves that everything was okay. Now go back 9 years, pull up the 1968 comeback special, that Elvis is a different species entirely. Lean, electric, dangerous. He moved like a predator and sang like a man who knew he was the best to ever do it. The leather jacket, the slicked hair, the eyes that made women lose their minds. That was Elvis at his peak. That was the image the world wanted to hold on to forever. So, what happened between 1968 and 1977? What turns a god into a ghost in less than a decade? Everyone asked that question. Magazine covers, tabloid stories, whispered rumors in the industry. Everyone asked. But here's the thing about questions that have ugly answers. People stop wanting to hear them. They'd rather believe the comfortable lie than face the obvious truth. And the truth about Elvis was obvious to anyone willing to actually look. The pain started earlier than most people realize. By the early 70s, Elvis was already complaining about things that should have triggered alarm bells. Stomach problems that wouldn't go away, headaches that lasted for days, back pain so severe that getting through a show felt like torture. He told people. He wasn't hiding it. He described exactly what he was feeling to the people whose job it was to keep him healthy. And here's where the nightmare really begins. Elvis had doctors. He had a personal physician on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He had access to the best medical care money could buy in 1970s America. So how does a man with unlimited medical resources end up with a body that looked like it had been neglected for 15 years? The answer is simple and devastating. The people around Elvis weren't trying to keep him healthy. They were trying to keep him performing. There's a difference, a massive, fatal difference. When you're trying to keep someone healthy, you run tests, you investigate symptoms, you figure out what's actually wrong. When you're trying to keep someone performing, you make the symptoms go away by any means necessary. You don't treat the disease, you silence the warnings. Elvis wasn't ignoring his pain alone. He had an entire team helping him ignore it, enabling it, medicating it into silence night after night so he could get back on that stage and generate the millions of dollars that everyone around him depended on. But here's the thing about pain your body's been screaming about for years. Eventually, it stops asking for help. It stops sending warnings. It just starts shutting down system by system, organ by organ. And by the time Elvis finally couldn't push through anymore, by the time the pain became impossible to medicate away, his body had already made the decision for him. The king was already dying. He just didn't know it yet. In the final 8 months of Elvis Presley's life, his personal physician prescribed him over 10,000 doses of sedatives amphetamines, and narcotics. Let that number actually sink in for a moment. 10,000 doses, 8 months, one patient. That's not medicine. That's not pain management. That's chemical warfare against a body that was already losing the fight. Dr. George Nicopolis, known to everyone in Elvis's circle as Dr. Nick, would later stand trial for overprescribing. He was acquitted, but the prescription records told a story that no courtroom verdict could erase. This was a man writing scripts at a pace that would get any other physician's license revoked immediately. And the question nobody could adequately answer was simple. Why did Elvis need that much medication in the first place? The official explanation was always vague. Stress, insomnia, the pressures of fame and touring. Elvis just needed help relaxing, help sleeping, help getting through the demands of being the biggest entertainer on the planet. That narrative was comfortable for everyone involved. It made Elvis look like a victim of his own success rather than a victim of medical negligence. But the symptoms he was actually experiencing told a completely different story. Elvis complained constantly about digestive agony that made eating feel like swallowing glass. He described headaches that wouldn't respond to anything and lasted for days at a time. His back pain had become so severe that standing for an entire concert felt like an act of physical heroism. These weren't stress symptoms. These weren't the normal complaints of a tired performer. These were warning signs of serious, diagnosable, treatable medical conditions that somehow never got properly diagnosed or treated. What was actually happening inside Elvis's body while everyone focused on keeping him sedated and functional? His colon was slowly dying, becoming distended and impacted to a degree that would have been immediately obvious with basic diagnostic testing. His liver was struggling under the weight of processing thousands of pills that never should have been prescribed together. His heart was enlarging, straining, developing the kind of damage that cardiologists can spot on a routine examination. Every system in his body was sending up flares, and every flare was answered with another prescription instead of an actual diagnosis. The drugs weren't treating his illness. They were masking it. Every pill was a temporary patch on a wound that kept getting deeper, and the people handing him those pills had to know that something fundamental was being missed. You don't prescribe 10,000 doses of heavy medication to a healthy man with stress problems. You prescribe that kind of arsenal to someone whose body is screaming in ways that terrify you. Elvis himself knew something was catastrophically wrong. He told people close to him that he didn't think he would live long. He talked about death with a frequency that disturbed the people around him. They interpreted it as depression, as the dark moods of a lonely superstar. They medicated those feelings too. But Elvis wasn't being morbid. He was being observant. His body was telling him something that his doctors refused to investigate. And some part of him understood exactly what that meant. He asked to see other physicians at various points. Those requests were discouraged by his team, redirected back to Dr. Nick and the existing system. He expressed wanting to stop touring, to take real time off and address what was happening to him. He was told that wasn't financially possible, that too many people depended on the Elvis machine continuing to operate. The walls around him weren't just built from fame and money, they were built from the priorities of everyone who benefited from keeping him on stage regardless of the cost. This was a feedback loop designed to kill him. Illness created symptoms. Symptoms were medicated instead of investigated. Medication created new problems and masked the underlying disease. The disease progressed unchecked. More symptoms emerged. More medication followed. Round and round it went, year after year, while the king of rock and roll slowly dissolved from the inside out, and everyone around him watched it happen while telling themselves they were helping. The afternoon of August 16th, 1977, started like any other day at Graceland. Elvis had been up most of the night, which wasn't unusual. He'd played racquetball with his cousin around 4 in the morning, complained about not feeling well, and eventually retreated to his master suite with a book and the promise of sleep. His girlfriend, Ginger Alden, dozed off beside him and woke up alone in bed sometime after 1 in the afternoon. She found him on the bathroom floor, face down, completely unresponsive. The king of rock and roll was gone at 42 years old. But cardiac arrhythmia doesn't explain why a 42-year-old man's heart would suddenly give out. It doesn't explain what created the conditions for that failure. And what the full autopsy revealed was so disturbing, so medically shocking, that significant portions of it were sealed for 50 years. The heart they removed from Elvis Presley's chest was grotesquely enlarged. A normal human heart weighs somewhere around 300 grams. Elvis's heart was nearly double that size, stretched and strained from years of working overtime to keep a failing body alive. The muscle tissue showed extensive scarring, evidence of damage that had accumulated over many years. This wasn't sudden cardiac death. This was the final collapse of a heart that had been struggling and deteriorating for at least a decade. But the heart wasn't even the most disturbing finding. That distinction belongs to what they discovered in his digestive system. Elvis's colon had become what medical professionals call a megacolon, distended to nearly 3 times its normal diameter. A healthy human colon measures roughly 2 to 3 inches across. Elvis's measured between 5 and 6 inches. It was also significantly longer than normal and impacted with somewhere between 30 and 40 pounds of fecal matter that his body had been unable to eliminate. 30 pounds. His colon alone was carrying 30 pounds of waste that had been accumulating because the organ had essentially stopped functioning properly. This condition causes unimaginable abdominal pain, the exact kind of digestive agony Elvis had complained about for years. It's also completely treatable with surgery if diagnosed in time. Doctors can remove the damaged section of colon and restore normal function. People survive this condition all the time when their physicians actually bother to look for it. Elvis's liver showed significant damage from the endless parade of pharmaceuticals it had been forced to process. His arteries were blocked and hardened well beyond what his age should have allowed. Every major system in his body showed evidence of prolonged deterioration and neglect. The medical examiner later described it as one of the most damaged bodies he had ever autopsied in someone that young. This wasn't a man who dropped dead unexpectedly. This was a man whose body had been failing publicly for years, while an army of people pretended not to notice. The controversy surrounding these findings has never fully settled. The complete autopsy results were sealed by the Presley family under the claim of privacy, not scheduled for public release until 2027. Critics have argued for decades that the sealing had less to do with privacy and more to do with protecting the Elvis industry from uncomfortable questions. Questions about why his personal physician was never held accountable. Questions about why basic diagnostic procedures were apparently never performed. Questions about who benefited from keeping Elvis medicated and performing instead of hospitalized and treated. Dr. Nick faced a medical board review and eventually lost his license years later for overprescribing to other patients. He was charged with criminal negligence in Elvis's death and acquitted by a jury that bought his explanation of trying to manage an unmanageable patient. But the prescription records remained. The autopsy findings remained. And the 42-year-old body on that examining table told a story that no courtroom testimony could rewrite. Elvis Presley didn't die because his heart suddenly stopped. He died because everything that could have saved him was deliberately, systematically, profitably ignored. The Memphis Mafia saw everything. That's what makes this part of the story so difficult to process. Elvis surrounded himself with a tight-knit group of friends, cousins, and associates who were with him constantly. They traveled with him. They lived at Graceland with him. They watched him eat, sleep, perform, and slowly fall apart over the course of nearly 2 decades. These weren't distant acquaintances reading about Elvis in magazines. These were the people handing him water bottles backstage while he struggled to catch his breath. They saw the decline happening in real time, day after day, year after year. Some of them have spoken publicly in the decades since his death. Their explanations tend to follow a similar pattern. They were scared. They didn't know what to do. Elvis was the king, and you didn't tell the king what to do. He was stubborn, resistant to criticism, surrounded by yes men who had learned that disagreement meant exile from the inner circle. All of that may be true. But there's another truth underneath those explanations that nobody likes to acknowledge. Every single member of that inner circle depended on Elvis for their livelihood. Their jobs, their homes, their identities were all wrapped up in keeping the Elvis machine running smoothly. When your entire existence depends on a sick man continuing to perform, how hard do you really push for him to stop? How aggressively do you advocate for the medical intervention that might shut down the tour, cancel the Vegas residency, and eliminate the income that pays for your lifestyle? The uncomfortable answer is that you don't push very hard at all. You convince yourself that he's fine, that the doctors have it under control, that Elvis knows his own body better than anyone. You tell yourself whatever story helps you sleep at night while the man signing your checks slowly dies in front of you. Priscilla Presley was no longer married to Elvis by the time his health reached critical levels. They had divorced in 1973, 4 years before his death. But she remained connected to his world through their daughter, Lisa Marie, and through the genuine concern she still felt for the father of her child. In interviews years later, Priscilla described attempting to intervene, trying to break through the fortress of enablers that surrounded her ex-husband. The wall was impenetrable. Elvis had constructed a bubble around himself filled with people who told him exactly what he wanted to hear, and anyone who challenged that bubble was simply pushed outside of it. She described the frustration of watching from a distance, knowing something was terribly wrong, but having no power to change it. By the mid-70s, Elvis had isolated himself so completely that even the mother of his only child couldn't reach him with a message he didn't want to hear. The people controlling access to Elvis had learned that their positions depended on keeping difficult truths away from him. Priscilla represented a difficult truth. So Priscilla was kept at arm's length while the sycophants maintained their positions and the prescriptions kept flowing. And then there's Lisa Marie. She was 9 years old when her father died. 9. Old enough to sense that something was wrong with Daddy, but far too young to understand what she was witnessing or do anything about it. She would later describe the confusion of those final years, knowing that her father wasn't okay, but being surrounded by adults who insisted everything was fine. Children trust adults to handle adult problems. Lisa Marie trusted that the grown-ups in her father's life were taking care of him. That trust was catastrophically misplaced. She grew up carrying the weight of that loss and eventually the weight of understanding how preventable it was. Imagine processing as an adult what you witnessed as a child and realizing that your father didn't have to die. Imagine understanding that the people you trusted to protect him were actually protecting their own interests. That kind of revelation doesn't just cause grief. It causes a fundamental fracture in how you understand the world and the people in it. Lisa Marie spent her entire adult life navigating the shadow of what happened to her father, and she carried that burden until her own untimely death in 2023. The system that killed Elvis wasn't unique to him. The entertainment industry has a body count that stretches back decades and continues accumulating new victims every year. Fame creates a particular kind of vulnerability that most people never experience. You become surrounded by people whose financial survival depends on your continued productivity. Your health becomes secondary to your output. Your pain becomes an obstacle to be managed rather than a signal to be heeded. The very people who should protect you become the walls that prevent help from reaching you. What would it have taken to save Elvis Presley? One person. That's it. One person with enough power and enough integrity to say stop. One doctor willing to risk his lucrative position to demand real diagnostic work. One friend willing to sacrifice his place in the inner circle to force an intervention. One family member with enough access to drag Elvis to a hospital that wasn't controlled by the people enabling his destruction. It would have taken one person choosing his life over their comfort. Nobody made that choice. Not one single person in Elvis's orbit loved him enough or was brave enough to risk their own position for his survival. And so the king of rock and roll died on a bathroom floor at 42. His body ravaged by conditions that modern medicine could have treated years earlier. He didn't die of a heart attack. He didn't die of drug addiction. He died because an entire industry decided that his productivity mattered more than his survival. And the most terrifying thing doctors found wasn't disease. It was evidence of betrayal written into every damaged organ. If this story hit you the way it hit me, I need to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think really killed Elvis. Was it his own choices or the people who should have saved him? Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.